Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to yet another addition to my journey through One Piece. Today we're going to be talking about the Sabaody Archipelago arc, and I know it's supposedly properly pronounced Shabandi or something. Some people like to pronounce it that. It's apparently pronounced that way in the anime. I don't know exactly, and you know, usually I try to do that, like I don't call Zoro Zolo, but I just can't. I can't. Shabandi is so different from Sabaody. I can't read Sabaody and say Shabandi. It just doesn't work in my brain. Sorry about that. Please bear with me. But yes, this is the Sabaody Archipelago arc. This is a arc that took me aback in a lot of ways, and made me rethink a bunch of things I thought about the series, or kind of not so much rethink as much as pivot a little bit. It was unexpected in the directions that it went, and unexpected in a really good way. But we'll get into that in a bit. First, just to get a few things out of the way, one thing I really want you guys to know, that I implore you guys to do, now, of course, these videos are me talking for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, who knows how long, about these One Piece arcs that encapsulate many, many chapters of a series I've never read before, my first time with it. Now, as a result, I will make mistakes. I have made mistakes many times. I've gotten facts wrong, I've misspoken, etc., and that's just part and parcel of this experience. You guys know this, I know this, it's just a thing that happens with videos or long-form content like this, podcasts, whatever. Now, just one thing I want to bring to your attention with regards to this is that 2 videos ago, in the Enies Lobby finale, I talked about how Shanks and Buggy were on Whitebeard's ship, when it's clear they were actually on Roger's ship. That was just me misspeaking. I just said the wrong thing, and like I asked you guys to do, you guys pointed out that that was a mistake, I misspoke. But just so you guys know, whenever I notice a mistake like that, or it's pointed out to me, I will talk about it, or I'll correct myself in the pinned comment. So I definitely implore you, next time you want to make a correction or something like that, just check the pinned comment to see if I've already corrected myself there, because it's happened quite a bit where people just don't check the pinned comment, which is understandable. Maybe sometimes you just don't know what that's for, but that's why I'm bringing it to your attention now. Any corrections or anything that are brought to my attention, I will include in the pinned comment, so just keep an eye on that. Because for that Shanks Buggy thing, a patron actually who had early access told me about that weeks prior, and I put it in the pinned comment, but no one checked the pinned comment, so they didn't realize that I new. So just for you to be aware of. As always, if you want to see the next video, which will be about the Amazon Lily arc, you can do so by subscribing to my Patreon, where you can watch that right now for early access. If you want to join the Twitch streams, you can follow me on Twitch, link is in the description and pinned comment, and you can join the Discord as well for everything to do with schedules with regards to streams. Lately, I've been getting a lot of people who are asking about the schedule. It's all on the Discord. Definitely, just even if you don't plan on using it for anything other than that, if you have a Discord account, I would definitely recommend checking that out if you want any details with regards to stream schedules. Now, before getting into the actual meat of the video, as always, let's get to some AJP's comments. These are for Enies Lobby Part 2, the finale of Enies Lobby. Next, there are 2 comments actually, one from Rissois, and one from Valor Delink. Now, there's nothing I have specifically in terms of a discussion point to latch on to. A lot of it was like pointing out some extra little details that they had and bits of insight to share, and both of them had these little tidbits to share with me, which I really appreciated. So I don't have a huge response to either of them just because there isn't a ton for me to say, but I just really want to say I appreciate that. That's what these comments are for, that's what the comments in general are for, and they both were very sweet in their support. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate it, and I hope you continue to enjoy the videos. And also something that I really want to address for the comments for the Enies Lobby finale is that was the video where I talked about me feeling burnt out, and that I needed to take a rest. Lots of you were very, very kind about that and saying take all the time you need, etc. Take care of yourself, we'll be here. And that's just something I really appreciate, so thank you again. That was an incredibly heartwarming response. Next one is from Mr. Prado, who says, quote, "If the first thing that comes out of Usopp's mouth is an apology, then it's all good. If it's anything but that, he's not allowed back in our crew." Zoro says this. They don't respond to Usopp because the first thing they heard wouldn't be an apology, so they would have to leave him. They instead pretend not to hear him to give him more time to finally apologize. It's honestly so sweet. So yes, there were quite a few of you, 5 or 6 maybe, who pointed that out because I didn't mention that in the video, and it's very true. My apologies, that's a huge part of that moment, and I was kind of talking about the other side of it. I think it's a really interesting mix that they wouldn't hear Usopp of it being like, no, you have to apologize, and it also being them giving him every opportunity to apologize because they know he's that type of person. He just needs to build up to it. He'll get there eventually, and he is a absolutely essential member of the crew for multiple reasons, and they want him back, and they know he'll get there, so they pretend not to hear it out of this kindness and connection to him. So it's a beautiful mix of, no, you have to do this because it's just what's right. We need this hierarchy in the crew. It's how things have to function. It's a mix of that and this very sweet touch that Mr. Prado talks about here, which I didn't mention much of at all in the video, which I apologize for because that's something that really spoke to me when I first watched it, but I guess I just got swept up in the other side of it. But it's a lovely dualism to that, very genuine, and a lovely mix of love for Usopp, but also, you know, calling him out on what he has to do. And both are very important. The love for him speaks out to me a bit more for, you know, emotional reasons. But yeah, what a lovely, amazing moment. And thank you everyone who pointed that out so I could properly talk about it here. Nerd Corner asks, what is your plan for when you catch up to One Piece? Will you stop and let arcs finish before you read them, or do you plan on doing weekly chapter reads? So this is something that was talked about in my stream recently, and my answer now is the same as it was on the stream. I don't know. I have no clue. All I know is at the moment I'm really enjoying reading every chapter on stream. I'm not even halfway done. I'm a little past 500 chapters, which isn't, at the moment, halfway done. There's someone in my chat, Antagonist, who's doing a percentage count, and I think at the moment I'm like 47% through One Piece, 48, something like that. So, we've been doing this for a year, and I'm not even halfway through, and I don't plan on ramping up the pace anytime soon, just for my own enjoyment. So, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's not in my... I have no idea what I'm gonna do when I catch up. If I catch up, I assume I'm gonna catch up. With regards to streams, I like the idea of both letting chapters stack and then doing 6, 8, 10 at a time on streams, but I also like the idea of weekly streams where I read the chapter on stream and I can partake in the contemporary discussions and all that sort of thing. Now, that's Twitch. Both of them have their draws. I'm gonna have to make a decision, but that's far down the line. With regards to videos, I don't really know. I'm not sure. Feel free to share your feedback on that, but there are lots of directions I could go in for that. I don't really know right now just because it's so far in the future. Then we have Francesco Quario who says, to me, the moment when they jump on the Going Merry to escape Enies lobby is the perfect encapsulation of the spirit of One Piece. The idea of taking a leap of faith, a blind jump into the sea, knowing that your crewmate will be there to catch you. That even if you thought that crewmate was lost, they will always find their way back to you. Then there's the spread with the line, jump on board the merry-go, ready to sail off to the next adventure, as the island behind them collapses. That was the most emotional moment in the arc, probably the series for me. Not having seen it coming, the joy that I felt when the Merry showed up was undescribable. Yeah, that whole sequence of the Merry coming, showing up, being there for them, continuing this last voyage, and then into the burning of the Merry was the most emotional part of the arc. More so than Robin's backstory, more so than Usopp versus Luffy. That spoke to me like nothing else. Maybe in the series, outside of, like I said, the end of Skypiea. Those two are right up there. And I love what you say here about it being an encapsulation of One Piece. Your crewmates being there for you, knowing that they'll take you as far as they can go to the end. If they're lost, they'll come back. If they're lost, you'll try to find them. And continue on this voyage, this common cause to carry out all your dreams, merged into one, but also disparate. Complementary. It's a beautiful sentiment, and I totally agree that that moment is One Piece in a nutshell. You know, it doesn't cover every theme of One Piece, but in terms of the adventure aspect and the connection between the crew and the dreams and how you push yourself to protect one another's dreams, all of that is right there. Speaker 96, in particular, one thing I want to talk about that they say, also thank you to Speaker, because they're a patron. They talk about how there are two thematic motifs, one with the villains and one with Luffy. The villain one is about their spots as tyrants and oppressors who are taking the freedom of others, and Luffy is the liberator who comes in and overthrows them on behalf of those who are being oppressed. Yeah, totally agree on that. Don't have anything to add really, because I think we've been talking about that a lot through what it means to be a leader versus an oppressor, and how Luffy just breaks through all of that. So essentially all the stuff I've been talking about before, but the one thing I want to draw attention to here is that they say that I like to think of the crew as properly joining once they cry and learn to rely on and trust the crew for support, like when Zoro lost to Mihawk, when Nami asked for help to save her village, or in this arc when Robin calls out that she wants to live and for the crew to take her out to sea with them, and Usopp apologizing to the crew at the end of this arc as well. So there ends up being a time between when the crew members start traveling with Luffy and when they join the crew proper. Again, love your videos, and it's always fun to watch and listen to people's journeys through this modern epic. It's interesting that you say that because I actually disagree. You know, we've talked about two crewmates in particular, both the women, Nami and Robin. I've said consistently that, to me, they both properly join the crew when Nami asks Luffy for help properly in Arlong Park, and here, I said when Robin says, "I want to live, take me out to sea with you." I agree in that way. For those two, that is when they properly, completely join the crew. But I don't agree that Zoro completely joined the crew when he fought Mihawk. I thought he was on it beforehand. I never really thought that way. I think it was a turning point for him personally in some aspects of his dream, but I don't think that also correlates to the same sort of thing as Nami and Robin properly joining the crew in those instances. And I definitely don't think that Usopp properly joined the crew at the end of Enies Lobby. He was part of the crew way before that. It's just a part of his personal development that he left, quote-unquote, and then came back and came into his own a bit more as this member of the crew and became even more fully accepted with his insecurities bypassed, or not bypassed, but this roadblock overcome. I definitely don't think that he was not a proper 100% crewmate up until that point. I just think it's a big moment for him and Luffy and the crew, but yeah, I don't think it's the same thing as Robin and Nami. So basically what I'm saying here with regards to this question is that I agree with Robin and Nami, but you mentioned Zoro, I don't really agree with that. You mentioned Usopp, I don't think the same way either, but I can definitely see where you're coming from, and I'm curious if you guys feel the same way as them, or if I'm kind of on my own in feeling that Usopp was already part of the crew before that. I'm curious, because I haven't seen many people talk about that. Last couple here. Swood Noodles, another patron, thank you for your support, says, "I love how Oda uses the dynamics between CP9 and Spandam this arc to contrast the values of the Straw Hats. For example, Spandam's the epitome of an unworthy leader, constantly barking orders but never bringing anything of value to the team. In addition, this is the only time in the series that Oda power scales directly by giving CP9 power levels, essentially reducing their usefulness to raw power in Spandam's eyes. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats are a real family that values what each other can bring to the crew. It's no coincidence that Usopp doesn't prove his usefulness to the crew and himself by defeating a big bad, but rather by being there for Luffy in his hour of need and supporting the others the best he can. This ties in beautifully with the themes of the arc and truly emphasizes the Straw Hats as a true family. Love your videos and I appreciate all the effort you put into them. Thank you." And the main thing I want to address here is something I didn't really notice, which is that the power scaling with regards to CP9 that's brought up through Fukudo, I believe it was. I didn't really mention it too much, as much as like just touch on it as an aside and move on, but that's very true. It serves that thematic purpose in terms of indirect characterization by boiling them down to raw numbers and utility. I talked about how Spandam looked at them in that way, as tools, but I didn't really key into the fact that this power scaling thing was a part of that. It very much is. So I really appreciate you pointing that out to me, because it really is a summary of the difference of how someone like Spandam looks at his crew and how someone like Luffy does. Another reason in which they're such complete different foils. The connections between them are pure utility, cold utility, and no love for one another at all. The opposite, in fact. Whereas the Straw Hats, utility is secondary as much as the connections and the love they have for one another and the way in which they view the world and want to protect one another and go on this voyage within one another and share these bonds. And the last one here is from Steep Reviews, who says, "It's impressive the arc that Going Merry was given on a reread. You realize that in Jaya, Bellamy gave the death blow there, Merry breaking both times in the Water 7 saga at the point he had broken. The Merry is essentially on life support from here on out as it's patched up, holding together the best it can as it tries its hardest to continue the journey. The Cloboterman appears because she can't leave them stranded. Merry realizes it can't go on much longer, but she's forcing herself to go on. In Long Ring Long Land, they mention how the Merry's banged up and for a moment it's almost ready to break as it creaks, but the crew says there's no one on the island so it stays together. together, doing its best to sail just a bit further. And then they hit Water 7, being told that this is the place they needed, a populated haven where there will be other ships and options, and so the literal second they land and are able to get off, Mary finally breaks down, all the tension of needing to stay together gone, as she can finally rest. But then she sees the crew's division, how they're splitting apart due to her, how Usopp gets taken by CP9 and she can't let things stand, but she's helpless. That final request to Iceberg to make her able to sail one last time, to show the crew that she's there, that she was happy, she gets to have one final moment to bring them together, to show that she's okay, and again, the second they mention seeing Iceberg and rescue and they have a way out, it's her final breakdown. It's interesting how this starts from Jaya, the arc where Robin joins the crew. Their journeys diverging as Robin grows closer and learns the will to live on, while Mary realizes she's falling apart and forces herself to live until she can die in peace. All this for a ship. God, I love One Piece. Thanks again for the amazing videos. You're welcome. That is a beautiful comment to end this off on. And yeah, this is something that I think is a huge draw for a reread or rewatch for One Piece, the journey of the Mary, as you see and understand now all this time, it's really, literally its own character. She's her own character, and she struggles, and you can characterize her and personify her, ironically, in a lot of the ways that she holds together when the crew needs her to. And then there's these moments where it's just like, I can't do it any longer, I can't do this for my friends, I'm on my last legs, and she just breaks apart. And there's something very human about that. I felt that way many times throughout my life. But yeah, I'm rambling a bit. What I really want to get across is thank you for your insight for this comment, because she really does go on an arc, and that isn't something I would have been able to pick up on without the context of knowing where she goes and how her character arc ends. So I'm really looking forward to whenever, years down the line, I'm sure, I want to reread those arcs, Jaya to Enies Lobby specifically, paying attention to that, because that must have been a really great kick that you guys got out of that, in re-experiencing that and knowing where she goes. That's just really, really awesome character writing, really creative, and that, in essence, is a big part of why I don't think she'll ever go out of my honorable mentions for my character rankings. So that's all for today's AGP's comments. I did miss out on a few just for the sake of time. They were really great, this video. Thank you so much for sending them in. Like I said, I read them all, even if they're not selected, so thank you again. Please continue to do so. I really, really love reading them. If you'd like for them to be included in a future video, just be sure to use the hashtag AJPiece somewhere in your comment, and it'll be potentially selected. Now, the cover story for this arc involved CP9 and them using their powers for public service to try to help Lucci to heal, to help his recovery. It's some really good humanization stuff, and it continues past this arc, so I'll talk more about it in the next video, but it's really good stuff. I'm glad they covered this stuff about CP9. I'm okay with them humanizing them. I did mention before that I like them better cold as opposed to silly and lighthearted, but if they are going to go this route with them being silly and lighthearted, if Oda's going to do that, then great, flesh them out more in that way, make them more human, make them feel more like a perspective, give us more of a perspective, excuse me. And there's a really lovely scene where after, I don't remember exactly what they did some sort of service, they helped someone, and there's this little girl giving this flower to Khalifa, surrounded by CP9 as well. It's just a really lovely, cute, adorable, heartwarming moment, and I felt quite a bit there, and that was really cool. So again, great use of cover stories, and while I've not read a ton of manga, maybe like 25, 30, at a stretch, maybe 40, I don't know. While I've not read a ton of manga, I've never seen a story do something quite like this in the way that One Piece is doing it with these cover stories, and I love that. It's really great, and I can't wait to see how it continues. Now, the themes for this arc, for Sabaody Archipelago, they're quite in your face, to a great extent and to great effectiveness. You can't be subtle with the things that Sabaody Archipelago is going to tell you, and I think that's great. Like, there are times in which the themes in One Piece are subtly woven in. The main themes here are very in your face to great effect. However, that's not to say that there aren't more minor themes that I think are done quite well, because there are moments, or there are little details here and there, little moments within, in between moments, where I took something away as a major, or as an overarching minor theme of Sabaody Archipelago. For example, well, let me just get to the main themes. You know them, I know them. Dehumanization. There is slavery, there is racism, there is just the worst, most heinous acts done here. There is torture, there is just imprisonment, there is everything that can be done to discriminate against these people is done by the Celestial Dragons, particularly Charlos, who I think is the worst. The way in which that's explored in this arc is by far the biggest thing I took away from it, and it was very shocking for One Piece to go in this direction. Of course, there has been darkness, but there hasn't been an arc quite this dark before, so this was quite shocking. Nonetheless, I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of Oda doing his best to explore these sorts of things, because this world, you guys have talked in the past about it being this dystopia, and I said, yeah, I get that in terms of, like, logic and content and plot. I don't really get that in terms of the tone. A few more arcs like this, and I might be on board with that. We'll see how it goes, but this feels like a shift. This feels like a dark shift in terms of the tonality and direction that the series is going to go in terms of tension, in terms of stakes, in terms of content and themes. And, you know, with the way the arc ends, with Luffy being completely alone, a phenomenal scene. I will talk about that when we get there. But with the way it ends, it just feels like a turning point. We've never seen Luffy this defeated before. We have never seen themes this dark before. So those two in combination work in tandem for a shocking, visceral, gutting, but fantastic arc. It is very effective in what it intends to do, and while I was reading this, I was in pure shocked silence, grimacing at some of the things I was reading. But sort of on the outskirts of those themes of this dehumanization, this discrimination, this cruel treatment, the Straw Hats are the antithesis to this, of course. While the Celestial Dragons stand for the idea that the aristocracy, this nepotism, which allowed them to be put in this power, will lead to them being superior to everyone else, and those who they consider to be way inferior are just like cattle, worse than cattle at times. While they stand for this, the Straw Hats are the complete inverse, as you would expect. They connect with people of all walks of life, they befriend them, as long as they're good people, as long as they are worthy of respect and connection. And let's be honest, all they need to do is be a good person for that. That's it. The Straw Hats don't require anyone to be an amazing fighter, like another Zoro, to befriend them. They befriended wolves and regular village folk and fighters, people of all walks of life. So the same thing that happens here, they befriend Kami and Hachi, even after what Hachi was associated with in Arlong Park. So the Straw Hats are the thematic inverse of that, which is beautiful. And, you know, it ends in a mixed bag for them. We'll get to that for sure. But also, even more underlying that is this idea of this yearning for a life not lived by those who are discriminated against. For example, I go back to this scene where Kami and Hachi, specifically Kami, with Papag watching on, was just going through the amusement park in Sabaody, the Sabaody Archipelago, and just so full of wonder and life and joy, because this sort of experience had been barred off for her entire life. She dreamed of exploring this sort of thing, and she just got lost there. So this is the idea that these sorts of experiences should not be barred off. They should be available for all. There shouldn't be this sort of privilege there, because everyone, as long as they're a decent person, deserves it. But yeah, lots of intermingling themes. Also this sort of element of, as we learn more about the supernova, I think they're called something else, let me check. They're also called the Super Rookies, I think? I don't know, please let me know. But you know who I'm talking about, these pirates all over the place with these bounties that were introduced in this Sabaody Archipelago arc really brilliantly, in a sort of Durarara, Baccano, Tarantino-esque way. This gathering of all these sorts of different notorious people who may be kindred spirits, we have to learn a bit more about them, but the glimpses we got were very promising for character work. Just the way in which they seem to be all in it, there seems to be an inherent understanding among them for what to do. The Straw Hats were these new people, these foreign people into this land, but there was this understood agreement between pirates for what to do, as told to us through Bonnie. So this sort of abstract thing that seems to connect all pirates, I was getting a little bit of a theme of that. We'll see if that goes anywhere, or if that was just me picking up on something that wasn't really intended. But then also, the arc concludes with a theme of really what this new portion of the series has in store. Again, the idea of this is what you've got to face, and quite frankly, you are not ready. We've had moments like that in Baratie with Zoro versus Mihawk, in Alabasta when Luffy was defeated by Croc, Aokiji at the end of Long Ring Long Land. There have been a couple others throughout the series, but this is just different because here Kuma completely outclasses all of them. Luffy realizes it, and in a way that makes him more of a captain now than he ever was, he does the right thing here, tells them we cannot fight, which is the most un-Luffy thing ever, considering how he was in the past, but nonetheless says it, we cannot fight. Well, it's still kind of Luffy in a few ways, it's a semantics thing, we'll get to it, like I said. But at the end of the day, he is left alone, his crew is taken away from him, and his worst fears have come to pass in a way that sort of proves what Gekko Moria said correct, and has Luffy facing the prospect of what Gekko Moria went up against. What do you do when your crew is taken away from you? How do you respond? So that theme, oh, it's done so well. In terms of presentation, this is one of the most interesting and engaging settings. I thought it was beautiful. When I first saw this Sabaody Archipelago, I said, damn, like I wish there was a video game where you could explore this place because this looks awesome. And then the racism happened, and then I said, maybe not. No, I do like when stories, including video games, tackle those sorts of subjects, but you get what I mean. But I caught on to a little bit of a, not exactly, but a way in which this foiled Thriller Bark in a really interesting way. Not directly, but Thriller Bark was this place that looked scary and terrifying and horrifying and horrific from the outside, but the arc itself, throughout a lot of it, was quite lighthearted, silly, goofy, fart jokes all over the place, silly humor, and then obviously towards the last third or so, it got much greater in stakes, it got more horrifying and full of tension and emotion and drama. And obviously there were heinous experiments going on Thriller Bark, so I'm not discounting that, but just in terms of the idea of it on the outside looking horrifying. On the inside though, for a good portion of that arc, it was very lighthearted and silly. The lasting impression of it, after Bink Sake, after the fight with Kuma, after nothing happened, after the fight with Moria, was definitely not lighthearted, like I said in my previous video, but nonetheless you see where I'm coming from. Sabaody Archipelago struck me as the opposite. From the outside looking in, it is this wondrous amusement park, it looks beautiful, it looks wondrous, it draws you in that way, it looks like a vacation. And I was excited, like I said, but you spend just a little bit of time there, underneath the veneer of brightness and happiness, and you see that this place is corrupt as all hell. And not only is it corrupt in the way that, like, the world government has their fingers in everything, in, like, Alabasta, for example, during the Alabasta arc, in Eni's lobby even, which is extremely dark conceptually, but not only is it corrupt in that way, there is cruelty everywhere. Immense cruelty, just the worst kind. It reminded me a lot of the series on the shirt I'm wearing right now, Berserk, in a lot of the ways in which this cruelty comes about. Obviously, it doesn't feel not One Piece, it still feels that way aesthetically. So I'm not saying it's quite up to the visceral brutality of Berserk visually, but to me it's comparable in terms of the actual content and the acts. So yeah, I find an interesting dynamic between Thriller Bark and Sabaody Archipelago. Thriller Bark, like I said, horrifying on the outside, a bit lighter, a bit more lighthearted the more you get into it, and obviously that changes, I already talked about that. But we get to Sabaody Archipelago, bright, beautiful amusement park, wow, let's explore this place. We get in, racism, slavery, discrimination, corruption, human trafficking, horrible. And I've talked a little bit about tonal whiplash with regards to One Piece before. This is the arc, I think, that used it to its greatest effect, because there is a scene, for example, where I think Luffy, Hachi, maybe Usopp, I don't remember, I think Luffy and Hachi were definitely there. They were riding an amusement park ride. They were screaming at the top of their lungs, they were yelling in happiness, and it was just such a great time, and it was wonderful, it was a really wholesome scene. One page later, we see the most visceral, horrifying thing happen to a slave. I believe they're shot. Something bad happens to them either way. And not only is the concept of the slave in contrast to that just enough in and of itself, but also them being treated so cruelly. As if, I mean, slavery, that kind of comes with the territory for a lot of slavery, fictional slavery, but nonetheless seeing it in contrast to that. The tonal whiplash, that's just one example. It's there throughout the entire arc, and it's done so well through the aesthetics of Sabaody in comparison to the content of Sabaody. It's done so well. Sometimes tonal whiplash can be really jarring in a bad way. Sometimes it takes you out of it and breaks the immersion. This is an example of how it's done well in a fictional landscape. This is exactly the sort of tonal whiplash you want for an arc with these aims. Hey guys, sorry, I'm just adding this in post because I want to better explain one of the themes I talked about in this video. I don't think I explained it that well in the video, so I'm just going to do it a little bit better here. One more theme that I want to talk about is something that connects back to Water 7, which is the burden of leadership. We've seen in great detail in previous arcs, especially Water 7 and Enies Lobby, that heavy lies the crown, right? And that means your responsibilities have great weight, as Zoro imparted to Luffy during that arc. And sometimes that pays off, like when he decided to do what he did with the Going Merry, and it was the right choice, and it was the right decision, and that's that. But also, your mistakes are amplified. And that is what happens here. Because I don't know if I want to call it a mistake, but, you know, in the moment, it definitely feels like one. It is one that is true to who Luffy is, but at the same time, it led to complete devastation, and I think in the moment, Luffy regrets it, because what he does here is punch a celestial dragon, which has huge ramifications and consequences, and in the moment, him and his crew were happy with that decision. You know, Charlos had it coming. But right after this, through the complete dismantling of the Straw Hats, we see the direct consequences of that sort of reckless behavior, and I don't think it can be looked at as anything other than a mistake, because Luffy acts in a way that is very Luffy. I don't know that if he could go back and do it all over again, he would be able to, because he is someone who wears his heart on his sleeve, and just what was happening, I don't think he was able to stop himself. But at the same time, this to me is a mistake, and he pays for it, and it is the most brutal awakening in that way. It is the reflection of what Gecko Moria warned him of, and it shines a light on Luffy experiencing the horrors of the Grand Line and beyond in frightening degree. And so it's this element of, are you built for this? Are you ready for this? Are you, as you are now, able to take this on? Because Luffy in this moment is who he is, and him punching Charlos was just so characteristic to who he is. But if that is characteristic to who Luffy is, and it leads to such devastation and horrifying implications, maybe, as he is now, he is not ready. So that's very interesting, and I can't wait to see that explored more. And secondly, it ties into the theme of futility. No matter what happened throughout this arc, given that mistake that Luffy made, he did everything right after it. Everything right. He decided that the threat for them was way too strong, they were not ready for it, they couldn't fight against his better judgment or against his impulse. He said, we have to run away and live to fight another day, which is quite a change from earlier in the series. I think there he takes in and applies the lessons that Vivi and Iceberg taught to him, which is huge growth. I think in that situation, given the situation, he did everything right. But given the mistake earlier, given the strength of his opponent, it just wasn't enough. It was futile. And that's the ultimate feeling I take away from this arc at the end. Futility. I think we see it throughout the arc. I think we see it from the micro scale, from the slaves in the street who try their best to live a life that they can live and be happy, but nonetheless find themselves oppressed ultimately by Charlos, by people like the Celestial Dragons. I see it in Nami trying her best to bet, or not to bet, to bid the 200 million berries the Straw Hats had accrued for Kami. But just because of this twisted system, it's futile and she gets outbid by Charlos. So yeah, the idea of these mistakes and the burden of the captain and how that links in with the theme of, are you ready for this? You may not be. You probably aren't. And then how that ties into futility, it's just really great, dark, thematic storytelling for this point in the story, and it feels like maybe a turning point. Anyways, I talked a lot about the themes. I don't know how long it'll come out in the video, but it's been 20 minutes, which is, I think, more than I've ever talked pre-chronological story review about an arc's themes. But I think this arc deserves it, because it does so much, and it's 24 chapters, which isn't tiny, but it is one of these shorter One Piece arcs from where we are in the story. I'm used to arcs that are 50 chapters, 100 chapters for Water 7, Enies Lobby. Yeah, so this is shorter than what I've been used to lately, but nonetheless, it is one of the most efficient arcs. I think right up there with Logtown, it has to be the most efficient One Piece arc. Now, if we get into it, I've talked about all the darkness and the horrible, horrible content, but it actually starts off pretty unassuming and light. We see Hachi and Kami. Like I said at the end of the last arc, they find Kami. They see Kami, she gets sort of washed up on their ship, and they also find Papag. Now, just in advance, in case I do this by mistake, I hope I'll pronounce Kami correctly. For some reason, when I read out the spelling of the name, I want to say Kamie. I don't know why that is. I have a bit of an ongoing joke with that with my Twitch chat. If you know, you know. But yes, I'll try to say Kami as best I can. But soon after the crew find Papag and Kami, they, the latter two learn that their friend Hachi, who we know knows them through the cover stories. Again, great use of cover stories integrating with the main plot. Love this sort of thing. Hope it continues with Impel Down stuff in the future with Sir Croc, for example, NL. We'll see how it goes. But yes, they learn that Hachi's been kidnapped by these pirate fishmen, so they have to go towards the Sabaody Archipelago to get him back from these flying fish riders, is what they're called. They're led by a man named Duval, who says that he needs to get revenge against that man from the Straw Hats. Now, of course, when you see someone who has a grudge against the Straw Hats and references that man, you think Luffy. That's the first thing you think of. That's what I thought of. But that wasn't the case this time. So the Straw Hats, Kami, Papag, they all head out to try to save Hachi, which is, like I alluded to before, admirable considering what Hachi's done to them. But they make their way towards Hachi, they confront some of the flying fish riders. After a bit of a skirmish, they free Hachi, they get him, and Luffy finds himself face to face with Duval, and it kind of cuts off as Duval's seems to be explaining his grudge and what's going on. Then into the next chapter, Duval kind of explains that his issue is actually with Sanji, which is very confusing because we've never met this guy before. I was wondering because he was wearing a mask, is this someone we know from Baratie? I was kind of guessing a little bit. No, this isn't someone we know at all. And Luffy knocks off Duval's mask, and we see the reason he's been holding this grudge is because the incorrect drawing for Sanji's bounty, that's been drawn just on a whim by this random artist, after the photographer wasn't able to get a picture of him. The meme bounty poster of Sanji. This guy Duval has the exact same face that was drawn instead of this photograph. The reactions are hilarious to this when the Straw Hats find this out. Zoro's freaking out. Robin's just like, oh, interesting. Brook goes, indeed, which kind of killed me. So what's been going on here is that Duval's been getting chased around by the world's government because he looks exactly like the wanted poster of Sanji. It's Oda's little joke. He looks exactly like it. It's bizarre, it's silly, I thought it was pretty funny. You know, it's just, wow. The way those expectations were subverted. I genuinely thought that this was some villain with some tragic backstory. Maybe someone in the past from a past arc that the Straw Hats had kind of left behind who is coming to get revenge because they just didn't think about his woes or something. I started playing some really emotional music when this started happening. And then we see this guy with this southern drawl of an accent who looks like Sanji's wanted poster, and I guess Oda got that one on me. I don't have too much to say about these first few chapters of the arc. Like I said, they're silly, they're funny, they subvert expectations. It kind of gradually allows you to get into the arc, to the nature of the idea of fishmen being relevant, of the Sabaody Archipelago, of this hunting, of Duval as a character who ends up being more relevant later on, and of Kami and Papag and Hachi being reintroduced to them. So it carries out those functions quite well. It's lighthearted. There's some nice bits of comedy, like I alluded to. There's some nice bits of the Straw Hats working together here. It's just, I don't have much to say about it, but it was pretty decent. Yeah. But at the end of this all, Sanji defeats Duval. with a huge kick to the face, and that obstacle, that annoying obstacle for Sanji, his frustration was really funny to me, is done with. Now after this, after the dust settles, Hachi cooks food for the Straw Hats, and of course, Hachi being a huge part, being complicit in Arlong Park, Hachi was an interesting character there because while he wasn't malicious in the way that Arlong or some of the other pirates were, he was nonetheless complicit, he was nonetheless a part of it, and that makes him very antagonistic, and you would understand why Nami would hate him. He allowed it to happen, he helped perpetuate Nami's horrible treatment, and while he wasn't as heinous as Arlong, for example, he like I said, he was complicit. So, of course, he did some horrible things, and he knows that, and he's turned a new leaf, and he cooks for the Straw Hats here, and there's a lovely moment where Nami, who looks a bit upset, not wanting to really talk to him, he offers her some food. And Nami says that she doesn't forgive him, but she then beams this beautiful smile and says, but the food is delicious. And while she says she doesn't forgive him, it's a nice hint at the fact that she is taking steps towards moving on. Even if she can't forgive what he did, that doesn't mean they can't interact. And I think it's a lovely callback. We just had a bunch of Sanji material with the Duval stuff. It's a lovely callback to Baratie, the beauty of food, bringing people together, transcending these sorts of boundaries between people. And so Nami, through this gesture of kindness from Hachi towards her, of I'm sorry, is able to say, you know, in this moment, I can maybe not forgive you, but I can be a big person, and I can understand that you are making steps towards changing, and we can move on. And I love that from Nami, and it's a great indicator of food being symbolic of that, and also it ties into the fact that these people, different walks of life, difficult pasts between them, are nonetheless connecting here in some fashion, which is completely, like I said, antithetical to the discrimination that we see in the slavery and the trafficking. These boundaries put up, like we are better than you, all throughout Sabaody Archipelago. So again, great way of establishing that. But then they construct this plan for what to do going forward. So that they have to go to Sabaody Archipelago to get to Fishman Island because the water pressure underneath would kill them otherwise. And then Pawpog exposits some information about how to get to the New World. There are two ways. The first is to go through Mirajoa, which is obviously not viable for the Straw Hats given their notoriety. The second way is the seafloor route through Fishman Island. So their goal is to be able to get to Fishman Island, to go to the New World via the seafloor route, and to do that they have to go to Sabaody Archipelago to go underneath, I think, but also they need to get their ship polished with some sort of resin that allows it to be able to travel on the seafloor without being damaged. Now, this is an allusion to a lot of future arcs. Like, I have in my mind, like I've said, I only know the name of two future arcs, Marineford and Wano. But the Fishman Island arc is clearly coming in the future. Impel Down is clearly coming, I think. So I like the hints here. But yeah, the group arrive at the Sabaody Archipelago. It looks wondrous. There are bubbles all over the place. This beautiful amusement park. It reminded me a little bit of Super Mario Sunshine, for anyone who's played that game. A little bit about the locales throughout Super Mario Sunshine. I really love how it looked. And it was this moment where I went, yeah, I'd love to explore this place as a video game. And then quickly, Hachi says, yeah, just be careful because the world nobles go all around this place and don't get involved with them. And he says, even if they kill someone in front of you, do not say anything. So the corruption is immediately established there. And my video game dreams go down the gutter. So the Straw Hats begin exploring the place in earnest, like I was kind of alluding to before. And there's some really funny stuff as Zoro wants to go explore on his own. But Sanji and Usopp, kind of being like mom and dad, kind of just tell him, no, you get lost everywhere you go. What do you mean? And Zoro points out, looking at the groves, because there are individual groves throughout the island that are numbered. And he says, look, as long as I remember which grove we're moored at, I'll go back to the grove and it'll be fine. Look, there are numbers everywhere. And they go, wow, you're learning. And then so Zoro thinks internally, so it's impossible to get lost because we're at Grove 1, as he looks. But what had actually happened was that a bubble was passing by, and it covered half of the number. The grove they're at is 41, and he thought they were at 1. I love the duality of Zoro. He is the most raw, mature, amazing quartermaster slash first mate, and then he's also the biggest idiot in the world. I love it so much. And if we're just jumping ahead a little bit, Grove 1 is the human slavery, human shops, bounty hunter cruelty part section of Sabaody Archipelago, as opposed to Grove the 40s, which is like the tourist spots leading into the amusement park in the 30s. So Zoro is headed to the wrong section, to say the least. But the rest of the Straw Hats and Hachi and Kami and Papag, they do these explorations that I kind of talked about before. They explore. It's beautiful to see them having fun, and this element of Kami living out her dream in a way. This sort of romantic escapism before the horror. And it is this chapter where we have that tonal whiplash, where Hachi and Luffy are having the time of their lives on this ride, but then a page or two later we have a slave who is trying to leave, and he has this collar on him and it explodes, just completely blowing him up. That was what it was. He wasn't shot. That was what it was. And here we're introduced to Shalria and Roswald, slave owners, the first celestial dragons we see. And the language here is so effective in showing their cruelty, completely dehumanizing. Shalria says, "Oh dear, another one broke. Get me a new one." As if they're objects, as if they're tools for pleasure or enjoyment or utility. It's disgusting, and there's great attention paid to the localization of the dialogue here to get across that sort of nuance. And like I said, it's not super nuanced, it's pretty in your face, but the complexion of that dialogue being so dehumanizing, I think, is really effective. So we sometimes talk about how the translations can be a little off, but I think that's a great job by Oda, and then also by the English translation to capture that. It continues throughout the arc, and I'm not sure if I'll point it out when it comes along, but just know that I think this is a good positive for this arc to specifically exposit the way that the Celestial Dragons look upon everyone, not just through their actions, but through their language. But Shalria then kills the slave, and Papag says that these people, they descend from the world government. There's this nepotism here, you can't go against them. If you do defy them, it causes a admiral of the world government to be called there and to bring hell, to rain hell down upon you. So immediately after this, we're shown this really cool sort of map of the Sabaody Archipelago and how the groves are divided up. I talked about it before, but it's just really cool the way that in which Oda is able to visually show us the way that this really creative, imaginative setting, island, is split up. I really enjoyed it. And something I really liked or thought was effective is that I told you guys, and you know, I'm sure, that tonal whiplash is a huge part of this arc. That is summed up better than ever with the fact that this amusement park is right next to the human shops. I mean, that says it all, really. Like, on your beautiful Valentine's Day date on this Ferris wheel in the Sabaody Archipelago, you get a lovely view of these human slaves being sold off. Yikes. But the Straw Hats then arrive at Shocky's bar, where this woman named Shocky provides them with some information about the person who's going to be able to polish their ship with this resin, or to coat their ship. Now, the coater's name is Rayleigh, and he's been missing for 6 months, and so they kind of inquire about where he might be, and they kind of split up to go throughout Sabaody Archipelago to try to find him so that he'll be able to coat their ship. But he's been gone for like half a year, so it seems to be quite an undertaking. There are some cute interactions here, maybe a little bit of a hint at some romantic interactions between Kami and Hachi, which makes the later stuff quite sad, quite a bit more sad. But you know, I guess it all works itself out in the end. But this Shocky character, she's cool. She's in the know, she's been there, she's done it, she's very well learned. She knows a lot about Garp from all the while back when she learns who Luffy is. She knows about Roger. So Shocky's cool. I like her attitude, she's very knowledgeable, and she just seems to be this veteran. So the Straw Hats go to find Rayleigh in the amusement park, and then they also keep in mind that he might be in the Lawless Lands as well. And then meanwhile, they're informed about the supernovas, the supernovae, the 11 of them. They're this group of rookie pirates with bounties, all of them over 100,000 berries. And they've all arrived here at the same time. And like I said, it's presented in this very Tarantino-esque, Western-style way, kind of a reminiscent of Baccano, like I mentioned, or Durarara, the OPs for those. Really loved how they did it. Well, the supernovae are, you're automatically one if you have a bounty of over 100,000. So Zoro and Luffy both count, and then there are 9 others to make up the 11. There are Bej, Bonnie, who is clearly based off of Anne Bonny, the notorious pirate, Basil Hawkins, Eustace, Captain Kidd, Apu, Drake, Arouge, Killer, and Law. And from these little bits of an introduction, as we see just a flash of each one, Kid and Law immediately interested me the most. Just Law's overall demeanor, the way Kid seemed to go about his business, and his kind of sadistic, this kind of sadistic look in his eye. They interested me the most, which is cool because they ended up being the most relevant ones out of those, I think, going forward, at least in this arc. So it's probably it's probably a subconscious thing that Oda did through the way in which they were presented, with his art, with their expressions and things like that, rather than me really picking up on anything, because I don't think I really did. I think Oda just did a really good job in presenting them to make the intrigue for those two in particular be higher than the rest of them. But all of them are kind of cool, and it's a cool concept, just in general. Kid kind of unhinged, Law very laid back, love his attitude, very, very cool, very collected. But yeah, the Straw Hats go out to find Rayleigh, and Shocky lets them know, like, don't worry too much about him, because he is strong as hell, so he won't be put in any danger. But as they go out, we're then introduced to the concept, or the fact, that Camie has been kidnapped by this group of kidnappers to be put on this auction because mermaids sell for quite a lot. It's horrible, it's horrifying. And it's here where we kind of learn that the reason in which she was never able to go and explore the Sabaody archipelago like this is because of this. Because of this, literally. These people are less than human, they're viewed as inferior, they're viewed as merchandise. And of course, so from the perspective of these nepotistic bastards, of course they just aren't worthy of stepping on the same ground as them, as riding the same rides as regular people can, quote unquote. It's just horrible. But this is where we get context for the sort of tragedy of Camie's life, and the way in which she's not allowed these things that should be allowed to her. Her and fishmen in general, and mermaids in general. So she gets kidnapped, but then we also get introduced to Charlos, who, like I said before, is the worst. He's the worst of a horrible bunch. He is just inhuman. He is exactly what he needs to be. He's not a fantastic antagonist or anything, don't get me wrong. He just performs his function well, which is to be horrible, privileged, obnoxiously aristocratic, and childish. He is a literal child, to just portray the sort of culture that's been embedded in these celestial dragons, and the sort of situation here. Clearly a situation in which the Straw Hats are going to try to overcome eventually. And something that was pointed out to me in chat is that the celestial dragons, Charlos in particular, he rides humans. He uses them as transportation. Obviously, a human carrying another human in this way, the ride is bumpy, slow, tedious because they are suffering as they're doing it. In order to get where you need to get, these celestial dragons, Charlos in particular, could use a bubble palanquin, whatever they're called, to transport across the archipelago more efficiently and faster. But because they just want to shove these people into the dirt to prove their superiority and to just use them for these means, they use this less efficient means of travel to nonetheless show their cruelty, just as this power move, superiority, goading, lording over others, flaunting that we are better than you, you are less than dirt. It's vile. It's absolutely vile. Charlos goes around, he finds this woman and says that he's gonna be his new wife, his 13th wife, and he says that he'll dispose of one of the other 13 because she's old news, and it's just lots of establishment for why Charlos is goddamn horrible. And Zoro comes up to him, having gone to this part of the island, and he's about to confront him. But then Bonnie comes out of nowhere, stops him, makes a bit of a scene and kind of plays it off, and tells him the pirates have an unspoken agreement that we are not to disturb or defy the celestial dragons because we don't want the wrath of an admiral. That is an agreement we have, this pragmatic sort of thing, to conform to the laws here. And it's understandable why they do that, but I think what's really cool is that, one, they have this system, it's organic, it makes sense, but two, the Straw Hats are not the type who are going to go along with that. If they see that something's wrong, they're going to go against it. And that is who they are, and this is great establishment for what Luffy ends up doing later, which ends up being a mistake, which kind of keys you into the idea of why they established this in the first place. Maybe these pirates weren't defeatist right away. Maybe they tried things and realized, no, to live, literally just to live, we need to not disturb these celestial dragons. But the rest of the Straw Hats, in response to Camie being kidnapped, kind of start formulating plans to get her back, and Sanji calls forth the Flying Fish Riders and Duval as an ally. Robin and Nami, who are off like shopping or something, they hear about this, and then the Straw Hats kind of congregate together with Duval, Popog, Hachi as well, and they all just need to go and find Camie. Duval is very silly, he continues with his humor. In the spirit of this chapter, it's chapter 500, landmark chapter. I was really happy to reach this. It was a bit of a celebration. But it's kind of encapsulative of the One Piece spirit, you know? They're in dire straits. Something horrible has happened, but nonetheless, it is imbued with this spirit, this fighting spirit, this optimism, where Luffy assures Hachi and Papag, we will find her. We'll do it. She's our friend, and we'll find her. And notably, Luffy says, us three are friends. Like, you three are our friends. But we then cut to see that a human auction is about to happen. People are gearing up for it, and this is where Kami's going to be sold. And a lot of the pirates who we've been introduced to, the Supernova, are watching on. Kid is watching on, and he says, what a goddamn joke. And it's funny, because I immediately went, oh, Kid's kind of based. This guy, he knows what's up. And then he says, maybe we'll buy a slave. And I said, oh shit, okay, maybe not. But I think it's interesting, because I don't quite know enough about Kid to make this, to know for sure what he meant here. But this could be a cruel thing to say, because we're buying a slave. But because of the way in which he said this is all a joke, this culture's a joke, I think he might have been saying let's buy one in order to let them live a better life, or maybe to even free them. So I think that's very possible, and I lean more towards that than the former. We'll see how it goes the more we learn about Kid. I really love that you can sort of interpret that both ways. A little bit of depth to the character already. And Kid, in the midst of this, says that our awful deeds are child's play by comparison to what these monsters do. We also see Law, who's, again, very laid back, very cool and collected. He gives Kid the finger, which I just love that panel. That's one of my favorite panels in all of One Piece, just the attitude. I don't know, he's so cool. And then the chapter ends, chapter 500, with a revelation that Rayleigh is enslaved, and he was the first mate of the Roger Pirates, Goldie Roger's first mate. So this chapter 500 of One Piece had a bit of everything for One Piece. That darkness, the optimism, the togetherness, and then the insane plot revelations. All the Straw Hats kind of continue rushing over to the auction house to save Kami. At the same time, Garp hears word that Rayleigh is captured, and he decides not to do anything, and sort of keep it hush-hush, interesting. And then, we have this really great line from Nami, or this really great moment from Nami, who says, you know, we have, she says the amount of money they have. I believe it's 200 million berries, and it's something that's built up over time of their exploits and their achievements, and it's just been saved. And we know Nami and money, but when it comes to what happens here, she says we will spend every last berry if it means getting Kami back. And that is, she doesn't even hesitate to do that. As we, you know, it's not like we would have expected any different, but nonetheless, it really just shows her growth, the type of person she's become, how much she values her friends, and just what a great person she is. So I love that moment from Nami. Now this auction is this decadent, glamorous, aristocratic event. It is shoved in your face. The economic disparity, the hierarchy at play here, it is disgusting. And we get like this twisted list of all the values for each of the, I think the average starting price for each of the items, quote unquote. And mermaids, like I said, right near the top. We then cut away and we have pirates throughout Sabaody talking about the prospect of Ace being executed, which is the explanation for the lack of navy in the area. Now that just makes you think, what happened at the end of his fight with Blackbeard? Once again, it seems like it didn't go well for Ace, but also, is this what Oda was talking about when we had that commentary in Post Enies Lobby, where it said that the tides of the world began to shift? Probably. That's probably the case here. But this Ace news gathers more and more in pace and gets more and more powerful. But either way, this is what these pirates are talking about, and they speculate that this will mean war with Whitebeard, between the world government and the Seven Warlords and Whitebeard's pirates. Now, in the auction, the Straw Hats finally make it all the way over there, and Nami is ready to bid, and Kami finally goes up for sale, or for auction. And Nami is she bids 200 million, and then Charlos, out of nowhere, more than doubles her bid, 500 million, 2.5 times what they've built up throughout the entire story. It is absolutely haunting. It's a reflection of the things she felt during Arlong Park when she was not able to buy her village and get them out of their quandary. And this was pointed out to me, I think, in chat. Maybe I thought of it. I don't know. But either way, it seems like this sort of follows her everywhere. This inability to be able to use the avenues that the world forces you to dwell within to save her friends, to save the people she cares about. She just always seems to end up short. So Camie goes to Charlos, this little disgusting child, and Luffy tries to get to him, and he's being held back, and the imagery is so disturbing. As Camie's being sold, Luffy's trying to get to her, the Straw Hats are distraught, and then Hachi tries to go towards her, and Hachi is shot by Charlos, and Camie is just watching. And this is what I meant about this moment hitting harder, knowing that there are potentially romantic notes between Camie and Hachi. And at first I thought that Hachi might have been killed here. It turns out that he's okay. It's a serious wound, but nothing that will kill him or mortally wound him. But nonetheless, Charlos is just horrible. He's like celebrating that he got, not only did he get a mermaid, but he shot a fish man. And then Luffy, we have never seen him this angry before, goes up without really thinking about the consequence, just knowing in this moment he wants to protect the honor of his friend, and punches Charlos in probably the most satisfying punch to date, and yet it's tinged with this anxiety because we know what this means. This is going to bring about immense consequence, and yet, can you really blame him in the moment for not thinking of that, in the face of this horrific discrimination and dehumanization and disrespect for his friend? Like, the Bellamy punch, for instance, the Wapol punch, those were very emotionally charged and thematically potent, but there was an element of triumph. This is more of an element of just desserts, and then, holy shit, what do we do now? But it's really interesting here to see the parallels between this and Arlong Park. During Arlong Park, if you go back to that video, you would see how much I speculate about it feels like Arlong's story is not done, or there's more to Arlong's story, or why he might be acting this way. There just felt like there was something that was unsaid or to be fleshed out later. I think this is it. This tells you a lot about the Fishman lot in life, what they have to deal with, the discrimination, how they get pushed down and oppressed, and how the way in which they act out is likely a reaction to that. And obviously it doesn't forgive what Arlong has done, but it really adds layers and nuance and richness to it, and makes him a better character as a result. They're fighting back against the world in the only way they know how. After this punch, everyone knows the Admiral's coming, all hell breaks loose. It reminds me a lot of Enies Lobby, but even more chaotic somehow, because everything happened so much quicker. It felt like the Buster Call took a little bit of time to get to Enies Lobby, even during that raid. But here, everything is happening so quick. There is chaos everywhere. There's carnage. There are fights breaking out. All the pirates are getting out of there while the Admiral comes. Kid looks ready to go though, so does Law. And what I really like about this is the Straw Hats don't regret what Luffy just did, partly because they don't quite understand the scale of what's about to come, which is a bit sad, but also because they would have done the same thing, or they expected Luffy to do it. They're proud of him for doing that, and they just go, this isn't anything new. We've gone through these sorts of things, we've dealt with the world government, we've taken the world on, and we are stronger for it, so this is nothing new, this is just another Tuesday. They ended up being wrong, but I nonetheless love the moment and the confidence. Sanji, we have a panel of Sanji just smoking, looking very laid back about the whole thing. Nami is smiling, huge contrast to, I don't know, 400 chapters ago or whatever. There's just no fear, and Luffy reflects what they stand for. So the Straw Hats congregate, and then Rayleigh joins them, sort of guided by this giant, or sort of helped by this giant who he befriends, and he says to Luffy that he's been waiting to meet him. It's a really great spread. I love this introduction between the two, and he's kind of dismissive of the slave trade, like, yeah, they wanted to sell me, but like they could ever contain me. Very badass, very cool, and that would continue. So like I said, the Supernovas start to sort of abandon ship, so to speak, and get out of there as they hear the Admiral's coming. They don't want to be caught here, but as the Navy forces, or the world government forces, all employed by the world government, start to invade the island in preparation for this, there are some pirates who stand out. And with regards to that, we have this awesome standoff with Luffy, Kid, and Law. Not necessarily really teaming up, but kind of teaming up, against taking on the world government forces. And Kid is very smart here, because understanding pretty intuitively, after hearing about Luffy, and knowing the type of person he is, and Law as well, he says to them, okay guys, I guess I'll do all the work myself, you guys can just stay back there, stay safe, you just wait this out while I do all the work. Knowing that they're gonna be fired up by that and go, what the hell? No, this is our fight too, and help him. quote-unquote. So it's a really lovely moment as they square off, ready for this challenge, to fight all these oncoming forces. Now, on Marijoa, the auction house owner, Disco, I believe his name is, calls on Doflamingo to help him out. But Doflamingo just kind of goes, yeah, I don't give a shit. He says that slavery is irrelevant in this new era or something, and don't call him again, and the next era of the sea will be the era of the smile. That's clearly alluding to something to do with Doflamingo's characterization. I don't know what. I don't really know how to guess at that. There's such little information here. But, we'll see what it leads to. It's very interesting, very good hook for the character. And he mentions what was kind of hinted at before, that the warlords are preparing for a fight against Whitebeard's pirates. So it's all kicking off. These hints to this war. Unbelievable, like, the amount of hooks everywhere. This war, Ace, what Luffy just did, the oncoming impending doom, Fishman Island, the New World, everything. There's so many things going on. Blackbeard. Like, there are literally, 15 to 20 individual hooks that are, dragging me forward, as if I wouldn't want to go forward myself. You know what I mean. The momentum is unbelievable, and there are so many things to grasp onto. If, hypothetically, I wasn't into Doflamingo, which I am, but hypothetically, if I wasn't, then there's the Ace stuff. If I wasn't into Ace, there's the concept of this war. If I wasn't into that, the Straw Hat's journey and where it takes them. There's so many different things, and for people who are into all of that, it's just a feast, it's a buffet. Anyways, Rayleigh continuing to be awesome, frees Kami from her collar, and, the Straw Hats recognize him, see who he is, and he just goes, I'm done with all that. I may be a legend, but these days, I'm just an old man trying to make a living coating ships with this resin. He just wants to live in peace, which further emphasizes the nature that this is a new era that Roger set forth. Kind of another connection between this and Logtown. Now the fight starts in earnest between the three who face off against the Marine forces. They all have Devil Fruit powers. Law has this bizarre one where he beheads people but somehow doesn't kill them right away. Slices them up. Kid has this repel attack, which is really cool. And Luffy's doing his thing, and he turns tiny, but using a Gear Third, I guess. It's awesome spectacle. I really love seeing all these three together. They all seem to have this core desire at heart, this kindred spirit at heart. Even if I'm sure Law and Kid are quite different in a lot of ways, this spirit to fight back against the world that tries to stifle this freedom, they seem to all have that. So they beat them, and then Kid says to Luffy that they will meet again in the New World. And they all agree to do this. Law kind of makes his getaway as well, as all three separate. He inducts someone named John Bart to join his crew, and he says, yeah, I guess that's gonna have relevance later. But yeah, Law also has a bear named Beppo with him, or Beepo. So they make their getaway, the Straw Hats do too, but then Kuma seems to confront Kid right at the end, blocking his way out. Now, as this escape is being made by all involved, Duval comes to help out the Straw Hats. Law kind of goes to help out with Kid with this Kuma guy. I say that alluding to what we know later. And I think, as far as I remember, I think that's the last scene we see with them. They're confronted with this Kuma robot, which I guess is spoiling what we soon learn, and that's the last we see. But at Shocky's bar, the Straw Hats all sort of congregate and talk with Rayleigh, and Luffy's starstruck knowing that he was Roger's first mate. He's a historic man. A lot of them have seen him in books, they've heard of him across the sea. He's just a legend. And it's a funny detail is that Brook, having remembered his past life, I guess, thinks of him here how he remembers him, which is as a rookie, like an up-and-comer, rather than the veteran he is now, the retired veteran. But Rayleigh reveals something huge here. He says that Roger turned himself in. He was not captured. As the world government are wont to do, they shifted the narrative for to give them the illusion of power, as they love doing, as Spandam was keen to note in Enies Lobby, as they did in Alabasta by giving Smoker and Tashigi and their forces the credit for overthrowing Sir Crocodile. They shift the narrative to make it better suit them, history is written by the victors, etc. And so that narrative's been twisted to make it seem like Roger was defeated, whereas he was actually suffering from a fatal illness. This was soothed and prolonged. His life was prolonged by their doctor, who was Crocus, who actually was their crew member for a few years, which is wild. He's a legend as well, it seems like. But he prolonged his life, helped them conquer the Grand Line, helped them conquer the world, and after that, he became the Pirate King. And Rayleigh says here that he wasn't actually a king, that was just kind of a title, but nonetheless, it pleased Roger to no end to be given this legacy, to be this symbol, to help people who are of like-minded spirit to continue along his path, go in his stead. And he says that Roger was overjoyed by this because the physical life, which he will be leaving soon, he would have been leaving soon, is not nearly as important as the legacy and ideals and dreams left behind, just like our crew. And he told them to disband. A year later, he turned himself in and made this huge scene during his execution that signaled that this wasn't the end of the era of pirates, but rather the beginning through what he stood for. His death sparked a new wave, sparked Luffy, sparked people like Luffy, and his last words to Rayleigh were that he would not die. Again, the physical life, integrating it with the idea of Hiruluk from Drum Island. A man only dies once he's forgotten, and Roger will never, ever be forgotten. And Rayleigh said that his small flame turned into this gigantic bonfire of conquest, adventure, freedom, and dreams. It's a great metaphor, very similar to, again, the series on my shirt. And this inspired Shanks and Buggy, both of whom were on Roger's ship. Again, that mistake I made, sorry about that, from a couple of videos ago. But yeah, this inspired them. Shanks in turn inspired Luffy, or helped to inspire Luffy. This legacy was carried on through generations. And Rayleigh says here that Luffy very directly embodies the spirit of Roger. But while they're doing this, literally just 2 chapters later, Kizaru makes land immediately after Luffy has caused all hell to break loose through that punch. And he's an interesting personality. He's almost casual. He's almost like awkward, in a way, but nonetheless completely ruthless, cutting, cold, seemingly sadistic in a few ways. Those are just my first impressions. I could be wrong because we didn't see a huge amount from him, but those are my first impressions. He's an interesting character, and he's absolutely deadly. He is overpowering. But back to Rayleigh. He says that Shanks is waiting for Luffy in the New World. Maybe with Whitebeard after they cross swords, maybe they came to an agreement. I have no clue. Maybe it's the opposite. And then Robin asks Rayleigh what the Will of D is, because she knew about it from her past, obviously, Saul, etc. But she asks him, what does it actually mean? And I knew I wasn't even halfway done One Piece. This mystery was not going to be solved right here. And so Rayleigh says, I know, but do you really want to know? Robin also asks about the Will of D and the Void Century, 2 big mysteries, and he says, I know, but do you want to know? And Robin, as we would expect from this queen, goes, you know what? No. We're gonna figure it out for ourselves. If you know the answer, what's the point? What's the point in the journey on the way there, which is what they're living for? Detours, right? So thematically dense here. This is another theme, a kind of a reoccurrence of these themes of legacy, freedom, what this new era means. I didn't really mention this in the beginning of the video, but going through it now, yeah, this is all reiterated in a really interesting way through a recontextualization of Roger. But Robin is an inquisitive mind. She wants to discover this stuff for herself. Good for her. It actually reminded me a lot of from Hunter x Hunter, when Jing told Gon, if you want to know your mother's name, keep listening to this tape. And Gon shut it off. Similar vibes, at least. And then Usopp says to Robin, like, are you sure you don't want to know? And then he asks Rayleigh, does the One Piece exist? But before Rayleigh has a chance to answer, and I'm not even sure Rayleigh would have answered, he probably wouldn't have, Luffy is furious, and he says, Usopp, don't you dare ask that. I don't want to know if it exists or not, because it doesn't matter. The goal, and whether it's material or not, doesn't matter. It's the journey towards it, with that goal in sight. But the detours and adventures on the way to that are the reason we're doing this for the first place. But it's rendered void if we know for sure whether it's something that even exists. It doesn't matter if it exists. It is the fuel that lights the fire of their joy and their friendships and connections and adventures and freedom. Their dreams fuel them. And so it doesn't matter if the One Piece exists, because they're going after it regardless. But knowing that it would exist would completely destroy the wonder associated with it, and knowing that it doesn't would make the whole thing feel empty. And it reminds me a lot of the Gaimon chapter. Tons of parallels to that. Exactly 485 chapters previously. And Usopp goes, okay, I'm sorry, you're right, I shouldn't have asked that. And Luffy says, straight up, I will quit being a pirate if Rayleigh tells me if it exists, because there's no purpose for him anymore if he knows. And Rayleigh says to Luffy, it'll be tough, and Luffy says, I know. And he says, so you still want to go for it? And Luffy says yes. And he says the one who is most free is the Pirate King, because the Pirate King is the one who will dream the hardest and go on these adventures not caring about the end goal. As a byproduct of the journey towards being the Pirate King, you will become the most free. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way. So thematically beautiful. Such a brilliant moment for Luffy. I loved it. And Rayleigh approves, and he smiles, and so does Shaki. And he says, okay, meet again in 3 days. I'll be able to coat your ship, and we can move on from there. But I need 3 days. So the party splits up. They kind of want to lay low for obvious reasons. And there's a nice little moment for Frankie that I made note of where he thinks about Roger. And Roger's the one who sailed on the Oro Jackson, which Tom built. So it's a lovely little moment of reflection for Frankie as well. Meanwhile, some of these supernova are taking on the forces. That's going on. And the Straw Hats accidentally walk into a figure who Luffy questions, who are you? This figure ends up being Kuma, except not really. It is a pacifista. It seems like a mechanical android clone of Kuma made by the world government, mass-produced by Dr. Vegapunk. So these mass weapons of destruction that, you know, seem to be able to be, I don't know about sentient, but they're operational enough to carry out their goals, who are stopping the Straw Hats here. And not only the Straw Hats, they're stopping people all over the island. Now, why Kuma? I don't really know. Maybe we'll get a backstory for that. But nonetheless, they are deadly. Now, while all of this is happening, we see a figure with a huge axe who's sitting on top of this building, and he says he's kind of lamenting that Kizaru is late, and that he's not been contacted, and he says that we have to hurry, or some people who we don't know, didn't bother to specify, will be wiped out. Bit of a mystery, bit of a hook. The monster trio takes on Kuma, but they realize what we just said, that he's a fake. And this is a big problem, because even though they took care of him, he is powerful, this fake, this android Kuma. But the thing is, even the original Kuma was an android, and I think he's also referred to by a number, like 1 or 0 maybe. Maybe someone in chat told me that, I don't really know. But the thing is, even the original Kuma seems to be an android of some sort. We saw that in his fight with Zoro. Not seems to be, he is. So there's some sort of story there. Why Dr. Vegapunk turned him into this android? Was it punishment for whatever he did before becoming a warlord? Were his misdeeds in their eyes so grave that they turned him into this weapon? Is he being neutered in a sense? Is he being used as a tool? I wonder if that had any effect on his mentality. I wonder if he would be doing this if he had a choice. I don't know. I think it adds a lot of interesting theorizing that could be used towards Kuma. It makes me very curious about him too. Kizaru takes on Drake. We learn that Drake was a former rear admiral, which is cool. And Kizaru seems, like I said, very sadistic, nailing in the despair that others should feel. Hawkins turns into this scarecrow-looking thing. Drake turns into a literal dinosaur. And Apu looks on and says he's an ancient zone type, which is interesting. And then Apu starts playing his own body as an instrument. Hey, why not? And they all take on this challenge. But Kizaru disposes and wins his battle, and we see that his power has to do with light, refracting light all over the place, using it to transport himself, using light, using it to attack, using a beam, all sorts of things involved with light, very creative. I really enjoyed his power. And the Straw Hats finally defeat Kuma. I kind of got ahead of myself earlier, but they finally defeat him. But it takes so much effort just for one of these things, and they're mass-produced, it seems like. They're at least like 7 or 8, but they are just exhausted. They've defeated it, but they're totally spent. and it's clear that their fight is done. They can't do much more. But then Sentomaru, the guy with the axe, comes in. He mentions that he has the best defense in the world, or he's the most defensive person in the world. He's a human wall, essentially. And he is the protector of Dr. Vegapunk, the bodyguard. And he comes with another pacifista. And Luffy, seeing this threat, applying what it means to be a captain, says, no, we can't do this. We need to run. Where in the past, Luffy would always charge head first into battle. He would be stubborn, reckless, really hard-headed. Even if he was on the verge of death, he'd keep fighting. But here he realizes that they are outclassed, their fight is done, they're exhausted, and they could seriously suffer some losses here. He has to protect not just himself, but his crew. That is his responsibility as a captain, and I think here he's applying a lot of the lessons Vivi taught him, a lot of the lessons Iceberg taught him, and his experiences, what he's learned about what it means to be a captain. You have to be mature. If your impulse is to charge in, think about that. Think about the best course of action, and do what you must to protect your crew. This is different. He says, run away. There's an element of maturity here. Run away, live to fight another day. And he splits up the group. He tells Sanji and Zoro to be in charge of their own respective groups, them three being the monster trio, the strongest, and they all separate. And it's a smart plan, in theory, on paper. The three strongest should head these individual groups to make sure that they can protect them, and scatter, which allows them a better chance of escaping. And there's this desperation to Luffy, which really struck me. And they agree, but Zoro, after what happened in Thriller Bark, he's still not doing super well, and Sanji's very concerned about him, which I loved. Zoro kind of brushes him off, but that was a very nice moment, a nice touch. And it was here where I kind of made a bit of a joke, where, the meme where, it was here, Zosan, I know that the Zosan ship has quite a following, and at the end of Thriller Bark, with nothing happened, I started seeing it for sure. Here, little moments here and there, Sanji's concern for Zoro, with Zoro brushing it off. That dynamic was something that I saw like, okay, I can see why people ship these two. I definitely see it. So it was here where I kind of thought up an idea for a meme. I just said it out loud, but then someone in chat, Algie from chat, made that a reality. I'm just going to show it. I'm not going to really elaborate, but it was a good idea if I do say so myself, and Algie put it together, so thank you. I'm going to show it right here. But anyways, they separate, and the groups are Nami, Frankie, and Sanji, Luffy, Robin, and Chopper, Zoro, Usopp, and Brook. And Usopp, idiot, I love you, but dude, come on. He starts climbing Zoro when Zoro's in his injured state. But then Kizaru comes to compound this. It's even more desperate with Kizaru coming here, and they just need to get the hell out of there. Luffy has immense fear, screaming for Zoro, who is closest there, most in danger, and also hurt. And Kizaru's about to strike down Zoro, but then Rayleigh, out of nowhere, comes and defends him. And there's this amazing spread, this clash of these swords, a beautiful spread, even better in color, and Rayleigh says that you don't pluck the buds before they sprout, because the new era is just beginning. He is so cool. I love Rayleigh. I love his introduction. I love what he says. I love how he promotes this new era, and they carry on the legacy and spirit of him and Roger, and he's just so cool. He's just such a cool addition to the cast. And it really struck me how they begin fighting, and we are so invested in this fight between two characters who we never even knew existed a few chapters ago. Prior to this arc, we had no clue who Kizaru was, we didn't know who Rayleigh was, and yet this has so much meaning. It's really cool. He's this promoter of the new generation, and he's awesome. Also, a cool little detail is that Usopp tries to climb Zoro, eventually starts carrying him, but Brook's in the back, and there's this little illustration as he collects Zoro's swords. Which is a lovely little detail, because we saw the last scene of Thriller Bark with Zoro and Brook. Brook sees the amount of love Zoro has for his swords, and so he respects that and carries them. Rayleigh tells Kizaru to stand down, and Kizaru says he can't, otherwise the Celestial Dragons at headquarters won't be happy. There's a chain of command even for the admirals. This nepotism, this horrible, horrible corruption. And Luffy, it all clocks for him like this is beyond anything we've ever faced before, and he is screaming, run, to everyone. Run, live to fight another day. It doesn't matter if we're separated, it doesn't matter anything. Nothing in the world matters right now. The One Piece doesn't matter, he doesn't even care. what he wants most is for his friends to be okay, to live past this. As long as you're alive, you can do something with yourself. You can carry out your dreams, you can gather yourself, you can rebuild a home, a spiritual home. But you need to live. And so he is screaming, "Get out!" And he tells Usopp to take Zoro and go. He says, "We can't defeat them." And just wow, the power in that really strikes home. And they try to escape, but they're being pursued by all involved. And it's so desperate, it's not looking good. And so Chopper, in his desperation, goes berserk mode. It's so sad. We have this creature that was monstrous in Enies Lobby. Monstrous and, you know, it was tinged with sadness, but he seemed to be this embodiment of rage. Like, I'm gonna die, so I gotta fight back. Here, this was just desperate and sad. It felt futile as he transformed into this beast form as just a last roll of the dice in, again, that feeling of futility. It feels like even with Chopper doing that, it's not gonna do enough. And it's so sad. And the moans of him in this beast form feel like these cries of grief, this immense desire to not, and this fear to not lose those you care about so much. It really struck me, it's striking me right now, to think of what Chopper must have been feeling in that moment to do this, and what that beast represented. This poor child. And Robin tries to stop him, but it's too late. But then we see another Kuma android, and it turns out that this is the original. The one that can teleport people away. Because he touches Zoro, and Zoro immediately disappears, just like Perona did back on Thriller Bark. And then we go into the most heartbreaking chapter of the series, 513. Most heartbreaking chapter so far, as Luffy sees his first mate just gone, and he's breaking down here, he's spiraling. His worst fears, the fears that were hinted at through Gecko Moria, of this is what you could become if you lose all and crack. It is coming to be reality here. His words of, "You're not ready for this," they're coming to fruition. With Moria, we see what could happen when you lose everything. And we are seeing the possibility of that happen before Luffy's eyes. Obviously, of course, One Piece, despite how dark this arc is, I do believe it will go back to light. Maybe a darker complexion of light, but I do believe it is in One Piece's DNA to ultimately land, in the end, on optimism, idealism, freedom, adventure. And so, not for a moment did I ever believe that any of these members would die, or that Luffy would actually lose them. No way. But nonetheless, Luffy doesn't know that, and so it's such a dark chapter. And he wonders where Zoro is, and Nami kind of mentions what happened to Perona, because she witnessed that. And it's scary. None of them know what happened, so they have to get away. Luffy, again, desperate. Get out of there! Just screaming in futility to his crewmates, and then Kuma gets rid of Brook. Brook is next, Zoro, then Brook. And then he goes towards Sanji, and Usopp gets in the way, trying to protect his dear friend, his brother. And it's so sad. There's just a couple of panels, but it brings a tear to my eye just thinking of it, because Usopp is terrified. He is absolutely terrified. He is scared out of his wits. He has seen his two brothers disappear, not knowing what happened to them, if they are even going to be alive after this. And he sees that happening, about to happen to Sanji. And what does he do? He puts himself in the way. He defends him and he protects him. And he's panicking, he's full of fear. He attacks Kuma knowing that it's not going to do anything. It's not going to scratch him. But he just wants to do anything he can to divert his attention and save Sanji somehow. And there's this expression, as Kuma closes in on him instead, of immense fear. He is terrified. And that, wow. That right there is why Usopp, he's a brave warrior of the sea. He absolutely is. Bravery is not in the absence of fear, it's in doing what you have to do in the presence of immense fear, and that's what he does right here. So that moment really got to me. But Sanji, in seeing Zoro, Brook, and now Usopp all disappear in front of his eyes, he is losing all these people he cares about, and his expressions, the illustrations are so spot on. And so he just loses it, and he charges in. He's just devastated, not thinking of anything, and he goes too. And then Frankie, he's gone next. And every time it happens, Luffy screams their names, grieving, fearing. And then it's Nami, and this might be the most heartbreaking one, this one and the Usopp one, I think, as Nami has this fear in her eyes, and she reaches out to him, reaching. So close yet so far, and Luffy reaches for her, such fear in her eyes. And she says, "Help me," just as she did in Arlong Park. But the difference is that during Arlong Park, Luffy was able to do it. He was able to save her. Here he can't. He has done all that he can. He has made the right decisions, but because of his mistake, it just isn't enough. And all that's left is him, Robin, and this flailing beast that is Chopper. The futility, the desperation. Robin is gone very quickly, then Chopper, and Luffy is left by himself. And for a brief moment that seems to last an eternity, all he can do is think to himself, I failed. I brought this upon us, and I did everything right. You know, I told us to run against every fiber of who I am. I told us to run because we were outclassed. That is not Luffy to run, but he had to do it for their protection. I told them to run. I divided us into these groups. It made sense on paper. It may have been a good plan, but these people are different. And he just thinks, I could not save anyone. It would have devastated him to lose one member of his crew, and he has lost every single one. I can't even begin to express the despair that he feels here. It is unbelievable to me. And it was so powerful and so dark. It is the darkest One Piece has gotten by far. He is not ready. His best was not enough. Not just because he makes mistakes, not just because of the mistake he made, but because they are just so clearly outclassed in terms of power. And this is his lesson. How will he bounce back? That's the question, isn't it? But then Kizaru asks Kuma to explain his motives for doing what he's doing, as Kuma then, the original Kuma, transports Luffy as well, after Luffy has this moment to grieve, essentially. Which is strange to me, because in Thriller Bark, they wanted to take Luffy with him, so why does he transport him somewhere? Does he transport him for a different reason? Have their motives changed? I might be missing something, so please remind me if I am. But, if that's a spoiler, obviously don't tell me. It's interesting. The motives have shifted, it seems like. But that is where we end. This devastation. Unbelievable. Unbelievable stuff. That is right up there, I think. That is right up there with the most powerful moment in One Piece. I think we have a new addition, and I think we have a top 3, with the end of Skypiea, ringing the bell, and the silhouette, the end of Enies Lobby, and Water 7 with the burning of the Mary, and this. These are the 3 moments I think that have struck me the most in One Piece. And Luffy is shown with nothing hold back, his limits, his flaws, and what they can lead to. He always fights back against the world, he always follows his heart, but he did this time, and he is left devastated, and his crew are left defenseless and abandoned and could be dead by his perception, who knows? And it being brought about because of his mistake is just the biggest gut punch in the world. So, at the end of this all, I mentioned all the themes earlier, but the one that overrides everything at the end of this all is this Luffy stuff, this futility, these mistakes, this almost like a deconstruction of the man. He is punished for something that has rewarded him time and time again in the past, this impulsivity. He's gonna have to change. Not just in terms of strength, but in terms of the way he conducts himself. And this was a huge lesson. And he'll obviously get back with the crew, but how does he respond immediately? But nonetheless, despite that huge mistake, it's crazy because you can go back, someone in chat mentioned this, you can go back to every individual decision he made, and none of them are something that felt non-Luffy in the moment. That punch, though, is the main thing. That is the one thing that screwed everything up. And yet it was done in the spirit of how they've conducted themselves for 500 and whatever chapters. He wouldn't be Luffy if he hadn't punched him in the first place. And that is the indictment here. That is the real gut punch. Because he is who he is, because he would punch the Celestial Dragon there, that is what led to this, and that is hard to take. It is such brilliant exploration of Luffy and his ideals and the way he goes about his life. And I can't wait to see what it develops into, because this is exactly the sort of thing I've been wanting from Luffy. I've been telling you guys from the start, all the way back in some of the first arcs, I want Luffy's ideals to be challenged. They got challenged by Vivi in Drum Island. They got challenged by Iceberg in Enies Lobby, and those were huge moments. This is the biggest one yet. So how will he develop from this? How will he grow? This is such great foundation for him to potentially spring off from, and I can't wait. But that is Sabaody Archipelago. Phenomenal, phenomenal ending to a great arc that does so much, goes all over the place, introduces so many interesting plot elements in the supernova and the celestial dragons, and this amazingly emotional confrontation in this fight, and the idea of the fishmen and the mermaids, and how this enriches them and Arlong Park as a result, and how that could bleed into other arcs in the future. It has a great inverse relationship with Thriller Bark. They're almost foils to each other, not just through what I talked about earlier, beginning of the video, where I talked about how Thriller Bark is kind of the inverse of Sabaody Archipelago in terms of aesthetics versus themes and content, but also because of Gecko Moria, and him being a cautionary tale of what could happen when you lose all. Luffy seems to lose all here. He's not going to in the end, but he seems to lose all. And what Gecko Moria said was very much true. So Thriller Bark and Sabaody Archipelago, next to each other, they have a really cool relationship and bounce off one another really well. I think this retroactively makes Thriller Bark a little bit of a better arc. I think it makes Gecko Moria a little bit of a better character, and I think this is a better arc, Sabaody Archipelago, because of what was established in Thriller Bark. So these two work in tandem really well. This is definitely a 9. This is right up there with the best arcs in the series. I think at the moment it is my third favorite arc, behind Skypiea and behind Water 7 and Enies Lobby together in the number 1 spot. It was shorter than both of those, less sprawling, less epic, but no less powerful, and it does so much, and my appreciation for it can only grow in time. Now, I said at the end of last video that I'd clean up my honorable mentions list for my favorite characters. I have not. Sorry. So I got a bunch for you for the honorable mentions, but we're getting into my favorite characters now, and yeah, there are quite a few now. We have Gecko Moria, Sir Crocodile, Koza, Polly, Kalgara, Zeph, Iceberg, Lucci, Spandam, The Going Merry, Mihawk, Hiraluk, Cricket, and now Rayleigh. And I'm keeping an eye on some more characters. Like I said, Blackbeard, Ace, Doflamingo, Garp, these are all interesting characters, but I still need a bit more before I can confidently say that I know what they're about and where they'll be contenders for the honorable mentions or even the top 15 list. But add 2 more characters that I'm keeping an eye on to that list, and those 2 are Law, Trafalgar Law, and Eustace Ace Kidd. Those 2 are so cool, so interesting, can't wait to explore them more. But the actual top 15 is actually unchanged, to be honest. I don't think it's any different from my last list at the end of Thriller Bark. Actually, there's one change. We have number 15, Shanks. We have number 14, Aokiji. Chopper went above Aokiji because of the sheer amount of tragedy and power and desperation in his transformation at the end. That really got to me. So Chopper's number 13, Aokiji's number 14. Aokiji remains incredibly interesting. Frankie's number 12, Smoker 11, Noland number 10, Wiper number 9, Brook 8, Sanji 7, but Sanji had some great material. So he's closer to Vivi than he was before. Vivi 6. Number 5 is Nami. Number 4 is Zoro. Number 3 is Robin. Again, those 2 are nearly a tie. Number 2 is Luffy, and number 1 is Usopp, but I need to say, Luffy is very close to usurping Usopp and becoming number 1 again. After the development he's had, they are nearly neck and neck. And depending on how Oda approaches Luffy responding to this, he could be number 1 pretty soon again. We'll see how it goes. But then, that moment with Usopp where he fought to protect Sanji, really, that was so good too. So if Oda just keeps doing what he's doing, maybe Usopp will stay. I don't know. Anyways, that was an amazing arc. I thoroughly enjoyed. Shocking, tragic, dark, dramatic, emotional, everything. Fantastic world building, great plot stuff. One Piece goes from strength to strength, and from what I can tell, from what I've heard, this is the start of a lot of people's favorite saga. That's incredible to me. I can't wait to see where it goes. I do know the next arc is Amazon Lily, so that will be next, and I can't wait to talk about that one. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like to watch me read the next chapters live, you can follow my Twitch. If you would like to get early access to the next video, which, like I said, is Amazon Lily, you can do so by becoming a patron and getting early access there. You can join the Discord for all sorts of cool stuff. It's a great community in there with regards to One Piece and basically anything else out there. Very welcoming, very, very wholesome. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of the community we built. And also, of course, if you want your comment to be highlighted in the next, or in a future video, just use the hashtag AJPiece to be added to the pool of potential selections. Thank you so much for watching yet again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Many thanks for all your support, all your comments, and have a good one.